Look at her, still wearing his ring like it means something. The mistress laughed into the Gala microphone, her voice slicing through the ballroom's polite music. Heads turned, phones lifted. Laura's fingers tightened around the cheap wedding band that had left a pale groove on her skin. At the edge of the stage, Derek, her husband, her boss, didn't step forward. He didn't even flinch. He just stared past her, as if she were a stranger who'd wandered in from the street. Security shifted closer, waiting for a nod. Behind the podium, the mistress tapped the big screen remote, and a paused security clip flashed for a heartbeat. Lobby cam 9:12 p.m. Laura reaching for Derek's hand, while he leaned close to the mistress, smiling. Laura's mouth opened, but the room was too loud, too packed, too powerful. No one would let her speak, not with her boss watching. Then the CEO stood up, calm as ice, and someone in IT quietly slid him the full tape. Laura Bennett was 44, but the mirror in the employee restroom made her look older. Tired eyes, hair pinned up with a plastic clip, a faint bruised yellow mark on her wrist from yesterday's IV cart. She worked in hospital billing by day and picked up weekend shifts at the same downtown hotel where tonight's company charity gala glittered. Numbers, codes, denials. She knew how to fight insurers without raising her voice. She was the kind of woman who packed 2 lunches, one for herself, one for her mother's rehab visits. Every morning before work, she drove across town to check the pill sorter, reheat oatmeal, and tape the latest appointment reminder to the fridge. Her teen son, Noah, teased her about the Laura schedule, but he also leaned into her hugs longer than he admitted. Derek liked to tell people he rescued her, gave her a job, helped with the rent, handled the money so she wouldn't stress. In truth, his name sat on every account, his thumbprint on every card. When Laura asked for $50 for Noah's field trip, Derek smiled like a generous judge and reminded her softly that she owed him everything. Tonight, she comes straight from the hospital to the gala with a spare pair of heels in her tote and a safety pin holding the hem of her simple navy dress. She wasn't supposed to be on the guest list. She was supposed to blend in, smile, and be grateful. The ballroom smelled like perfume and polished brass, and the screen behind the stage looped photos of community impact while donors laughed over champagne. Laura kept touching her wedding ring as if it could steady her breathing. Derek hadn't looked at her once since they arrived. He'd walked ahead with a woman in a red dress, too close, too familiar, then left Laura alone at a table near the service door. When the mistress raised the mic and the crowd turned, Laura realized the cruelty wasn't a mistake. It was planned. And as the CEO rose from his seat, Laura saw Derek's phone light up in his hand with a message preview. Camera feed ready. Do it now. Her stomach dropped. The text wasn't from the mistress. It was from someone inside the building's security office. What Laura didn't know was that one quiet security guard had already saved a second clip with Derek's voice clearly on it. Oh, Laura didn't stay because she loved Derek. She stayed because every exit had a price tag he controlled. After her mother's stroke, the rehab center wanted payment up front, and the pharmacy refused to release blood pressure meds without a new copay. Laura's credit cards were maxed, her savings was gone, and the hospital offered a family discount that still felt like a sentence. Derek stepped in smiling, paid one bill, then moved every account into his name and told her it was for her own good. He kept her paycheck deposited to the joint account he monitored, and he handed her a household card that declined the moment she bought anything he didn't approve. When Noah needed braces, Derek said, "Ask your mother to heal faster." And Laura swallowed her anger because she needed Derek's company insurance for the rehab visits. The one time she hinted at divorce, Derek calmly reminded her that he was also her supervisor and he could restructure her position tomorrow. He didn't shout. He just tightened the cage, changing passwords, canceling her phone plan, and forwarding her calls to his assistant, so Laura sounded unreliable. Tonight's gala was supposed to be safe, a place where she could stand near the back and make sure Derek didn't embarrass the company. But the mistress turned the room into a courtroom. With security closing in and donors watching, Laura couldn't run without looking guilty, and she couldn't speak without risking her job and her mother's treatment. She felt for the photo of Noah tucked in her wallet, the edges soft from worry, and she understood Derek had chosen this stage because he knew she would freeze. Then a hotel staffer she recognized from the service hall slipped an unmarked envelope into her tote, whispering, "Don't open it here." And Laura saw Derek watching them from across the ballroom. Her hand shook so badly she gripped the tablecloth, pretending to steady a champagne flute she hadn't touched. Inside, her mind raced through consequences. Noah's school tuition, her mother's next therapy session, the rent due Friday, the fact that Derek kept the spare key to her car. She forced her face into a blank smile as the mistress strutted, because any crack would invite laughter, and Derek's promotion depended on her looking small. In the envelope was a printed time-stamped security still, and the CAO's name was written across the top, too. Crystal chandeliers threw white light over the hotel ballroom, making every smile look sharp. Waiters moved like shadows with trays of coffee and champagne, while a jazz trio tried to sound warm. Behind the stage, a giant screen looped the company logo and photos of smiling patients, but the air felt cold, watchful. Laura sat near the service corridor, where she could see the security desk through a glass panel and the small dome cameras above the exits. Her tote rested on her chair leg, the envelope inside pressing against her spare shoes like a secret weight. At the head table, Derek looked polished in a tux, laughing too loudly at the board chair's jokes, but his eyes kept cutting to Laura. He wasn't the gentle, we'll-figure-it-out husband from their early years. Tonight, he wore power like armor. Beside him, the woman in red, perfect hair, perfect teeth, rested a hand on his sleeve as if she owned him. A microphone waited on the podium, and a laptop sat open with a video window paused, timestamp glowing in the corner. Laura noticed a young AV tech glance at Derek, then at the ceiling camera, then away fast. On the far side, Charles Whitman, the CEO, spoke quietly with the hotel's security manager, his expression unreadable. When he looked toward the stage, he didn't smile. He measured the room, the exits, the screen, the people holding phones. The gala's MC called for a special acknowledgement, and the mistress rose, already smirking, already certain Laura would be silent. Derek lifted his phone under the table and typed with one thumb, calm as a man ordering dessert. Laura's throat tightened as she realized this wasn't gossip. This was a script, and she was the sacrifice. Then Derek stood up to make room at the head table, Ake stepping aside in a way he never did for her. He looked straight through Laura as if he'd erased her, as if the ring on her finger belonged to someone else. The mistress reached for the microphone, and the laptop cursor moved. Someone backstage had just hit play. A hush rolled across the tables like the moment before a verdict, and Laura felt the envelope in her tote burn against her ankle. Charles Whitman rose at the time, jacket unbuttoned, eyes fixed on Derek, and Laura saw the security manager slip a flash drive into the CEO's palm. Derek Bennett learned early that power didn't have to be loud to be cruel. He liked control that looked reasonable from the outside. Budgeting, structure, professional boundaries, the kind that made people nod while someone quietly suffocated. At work, he was the operations manager everyone called Steady, the man who could trim costs, charm donors, and talk about mission with a hand over his heart. At home, he kept the same tone, calm and measured, as if Laura's life was a spreadsheet he alone understood. When Laura's mother had her stroke, Derek didn't comfort her first. He asked for the insurance papers. He offered to handle the bills, and then changed every login, every password, every auto draft. He told Laura it was safer if she didn't carry cards because she was too stressed. He started giving her cash in exact amounts, 20 for gas, 10 for groceries, then asked for receipts like she was an employee who might steal from him. If she questioned him, he didn't argue. He leaned close and said, softly, "Don't embarrass yourself," as if dignity was something he could approve or deny. His motive wasn't love or even lust. It was status. Derek had been chasing a senior promotion for months, and the board liked men who looked untouchable, strong, polished, free of mess. Laura's sick mother, their teen son, the bills, the exhaustion. Those were stains on the image he was selling. The mistress in red, Madison, was a shortcut, younger, glossy, connected to a donor family. With her on his arm, Derek could walk into any room and look like the future. With Laura beside him, he thought he looked like a burden. So he rewrote the story. He told colleagues Laura was an old friend he'd helped by getting her a job. He hinted she was unstable, overwhelmed, grateful. He planted little comments in HR meetings about her attendance risk, all while scheduling her mother's therapy appointments on days he knew Laura couldn't miss. He made her dependent, then punished her for needing him. And tonight, at the gala, he planned to erase her in front of the people who mattered most, so no one would question why Madison replaced her. Derek watched the room like a director waiting for his cue. He kept one hand on his phone, the other resting lightly on Madison's waist. His smile never reached his eyes. When the MC called for the special acknowledgement, Derek's thumb moved once, sending a final message. Laura saw Derek tilt his phone toward the security desk, and the live camera grid switched to the ballroom stage. But Madison Hale wasn't just a mistress in a red dress. She moved through the gala like she belonged to the building, greeting donors by first name, kissing cheeks, laughing a little too loud so people would notice. Her bracelet caught the chandelier light every time she lifted her hand, and Derek watched that sparkle the way some men watched trophies. Madison was in her late 30s, the kind of polished that came from money and practice, and she wore confidence like a badge. Laura had seen her before, twice. Once in the office elevator when Madison stepped in carrying 2 coffees, handed one to Derek without asking, and called him D. Another time, Madison appeared at the hospital parking garage, leaning against Derek's car while Laura struggled with her mother's wheelchair. Madison smiled then, slow and sweet, and said, "He talks about you like you're complicated, as if Laura were a problem file on a desk. Tonight, Madison's cruelty was sharpened by an audience. She wasn't improvising. She kept glancing at the head table, checking Derek's face the way a performer checks a director. When she stood, she didn't look nervous. She looked hungry. She reached the podium and let the microphone amplify her breath. "We're here to honor integrity," she said, voice warm as honey. Then her eyes landed on Laura and turned cold. "And we're also here to stop certain people from confusing charity with entitlement." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter traveled across the tables. Derek's friends chuckled first. The safe kind of chuckle men use when they know their boss is watching. Madison's donor friends followed, relieved to be included in the joke. Even a few coworkers looked away from Laura's face, pretending their phone screens were suddenly urgent. Madison leaned closer to the mic, as if sharing a secret with the whole room. "Some women cling so hard," she said, "they forget they were never invited." Laura's cheeks burned. She could feel security at her shoulder, close enough to touch, close enough to steer her like a problem. The trap was social as much as physical. If she protested, she'd become the scene Madison wanted. If she stayed silent, she'd be erased. Madison's gaze slid over Laura like she was judging damaged goods. Then she tilted her head toward Derek, smiling like a partner, and her eyes said it plainly, dead weight. And Derek finally met Laura's eyes, only to give Security a small, confirming nod. Security didn't grab Laura's arm. That would have looked bad for the cameras. Instead, the guard leaned in with a practiced smile and said, "Ma'am, we need you to step out for a moment." Madison kept the mic and turned it into entertainment. "Don't worry," she called bright and loud. "We'll send her a to-go plate. Charity is what she lives on." A few people laughed, quick, nervous bursts, then pretended they hadn't. Laura felt the heat climb her neck. Her wedding ring suddenly seemed too shiny, too visible, like a lie on her hand. She slid her palm under the tablecloth, hiding it against her thigh, and tried to breathe through the shame. Derek stayed seated, one arm draped behind Madison's chair, as if she belonged there. He lifted his glass to a donor, nodding politely, refusing to look at Laura. That was the cut. Not the mistress's joke, but her own husband, treating her like a stray employee who didn't know her place. The guard guided Laura toward the service corridor. As she stood, her tote snagged on the chair leg and the envelope inside shifted. She clutched the strap tighter, afraid it would spill open in front of everyone. Noah's photo pressed against her fingers through the wallet, and for one flashing second she imagined him watching this online tomorrow. His mother being escorted out like a thief. Near the corridor, Laura heard whispers, sharp as silverware. "Isn't that Derek's wife? I thought he was divorced." Operations really cleaned up his image. Each sentence erased a piece of her. She caught sight of Charles Whitman at the back of the room, still standing, eyes fixed on the stage screen that hadn't played yet. His face didn't show pity. It showed calculation, like he was matching lies to evidence. The IT guy hovered beside him, tense. The guard paused at the curtain. "Just wait here," he murmured, softer now, almost apologetic. "They told me you'd make a scene." Laura swallowed hard. "Who told you?" she asked. The guard's eyes flicked to the security desk window. "Your boss," he said, and the word boss landed heavier than husband ever had. From the other side of the curtain, Laura heard Derek's voice, low, confident, speaking to someone near the AV laptop. Madison's heels clicked as she followed, whispering, "Watch her break. Play the clip where she reaches for me, then cut before my voice," Derek said. Laura stood behind the curtain with the hotel's service heat blasting her face, trying not to shake. Beyond the fabric, Madison's voice floated through the speakers like perfume, sweet, expensive, suffocating. The guard stayed close, not touching her, but blocking the only clean path back into the ballroom. Laura felt trapped by manners as much as muscle. If she shoved past him, she'd look guilty. If she cried, she'd look weak. If she begged, Derek would win. Her tote weighed down her shoulder. The envelope inside felt like a brick, but she didn't dare open it here. The corridor had cameras, too. She could see the small red dot blinking above the employees' only sign. Evidence lived everywhere in this building, watching quietly, indifferent to shame. From behind the stage wall, Laura heard Derek again, calm and precise. "Cut the audio at 9:12, he said. "Let the room see her grab me. That's enough." His tone wasn't nervous. He sounded like a man editing a lie into a weapon. A door down the hall clicked. 2 hotel staffers rolled a cart of coffee urns toward the ballroom. One of them, a short woman with gray hair tucked under a cap, slowed when she saw Laura's face. Her eyes softened, then sharpened, like she'd made a decision. She reached into her apron and slipped Laura a folded receipt, quick as a magician. "Don't drop it," she whispered. "I was told to sign for this." Laura glanced down. It was a printout from the AV booth. Flash drive, transfer service, paid by D. Bennett, time 8:47 p.m. Beneath it was a handwritten note. "Deliver to security office, use lobby cam 912. Her stomach flipped. Derek had paid to move footage, paid to control what played. Then, from the ballroom, the screen flickered, preload mode, showing a grid of camera thumbnails for one brief second before going black again. Laura caught a glimpse of herself near the entrance, small and cornered, and Derek leaning toward Madison like a secret. The gray-haired staffer leaned closer. "Your boss thinks nobody reads the logs," she murmured, "but the system emails every export." Laura's throat tightened. "Who gets the emails?" she asked. The staffer nodded toward the back of the room where the CEO still stood. "Him," she said, "and he's not alone." Laura saw the IT specialist lift a tablet. On it, an export alert with Derek's name and a timestamp. Laura stared at the export alert on the tablet for one breath. Then the screen went dark as the IT specialist lowered it, eyes still on Derek. In the ballroom, Madison kept smiling, filling the silence with jokes, buying time while the right clip loaded. Security's guard shifted his stance. "Ma'am, come with me," he said, but this time there was no polite smile. He steered Laura away from the curtain into a narrow hallway lined with framed banquet photos. The carpet muffled her steps like the building didn't want witnesses. A door opened into a small office beside the security desk. Derek was already inside, tux jacket off, sleeves rolled as if he were doing real work. 2 people sat at a side table, the hotel security manager and a woman from corporate HR Laura recognized, clipboard in hand. Derek didn't waste words. He slid a single page across the table. "Voluntary resignation," he said, "effective tonight." Laura's mouth went dry. Why would I resign? HR didn't look up. "There's a complaint," she murmured, as if reading from a script. "Disruptive behavior, harassment of a guest." Madison's laughter drifted in from the ballroom, perfectly timed. Laura's fingers curled around the edge of her tote. "You're lying," she said, quiet. Derek leaned forward, voice soft enough to sound reasonable. "Sign it, and I'll keep your benefits active through the month. Your mother gets her therapy. Noah keeps his plan. You walk out with dignity." "And if I don't?" His eyes flicked to her ring, then to the security manager. "Then you're terminated for cause," Derek said. "Security escorts you out. I report you for trespassing. And tomorrow, the insurance paperwork gets reviewed." Laura felt her chest tighten. He was threatening her mother's rehab bed without saying the words. She glanced toward the security desk window. The camera monitors showed the ballroom from 4 angles, the stage frozen on a black screen waiting for a command. Derek's phone buzzed on the table. A new message popped up. "CEO requesting full export. Don't stall." Derek's jaw twitched. He snatched the phone, then pushed a second envelope toward Laura. Thicker, heavier. "Last chance," Derek whispered, "because once this plays, I'm making you the villain for good." Laura sat in the small security office, the resignation page between her and Derek like a verdict. Madison's laugh still floated from the ballroom speakers, and the bass of the band thumped through the wall. Derek tapped the pen near Laura's hand, smiling as if he were doing her a favor. "Sign," he murmured, "or I cancel your mother's therapy before morning." Laura's throat burned. She thought of her mother's pill sorter, of Noah's school photo tucked in her wallet, of the ring on her finger that had once meant protection. Her hand hovered. Then the office door swung open. Charles Whitman stepped in with the IT specialist and the hotel security manager. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held up a flash drive. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "we're going back to the ballroom now." Derek's smile cracked. "Sir, this is a private matter." "It became public the moment you cued the cameras," Charles replied. Minutes later, Laura was pushed back into the ballroom, right as Madison leaned into the microphone and pointed at her. "This woman has been stalking my fiancé," Madison announced, loud enough for every donor to hear. "She's here to beg for money and shame this company." Gasps. Phones lifted again. Derek walked to the stage, placing an arm around Madison like a hero. "I'm sorry," he said, looking over Laura's head, "but she's unstable. Security will handle it." Charles climbed the steps instead. "Hold," he said to the AV tech. The big screen flickered, and this time the full clip played. Lobby cam 9:12 p.m. Derek kissed Madison by the entrance, then turned and hissed clear as day, "Play the part where she grabs me, cut my voice." The next angle showed him sliding his ring off, tucking it in his pocket, then texting the security office. Silence swallowed the room. Someone at the head table dropped a fork. Laura felt every gaze land on her ring, then on Derek's bare hand. Madison's smile froze, lipstick bright against her teeth. Derek opened his mouth, searching for a lie, but no sound came. Charles faced the crowd. "Derek Bennett," he said, "you abused company systems to falsify footage and humiliate an employee. You're terminated, effective immediately." Then he looked at Laura. "Ma'am, you will not be escorted out. He will." From the front table, the HR director stood up and said, "I have the resignation he tried to force her to sign." The ballroom stayed frozen for a beat, like everyone needed permission to breathe. Then the whispering began, fast, messy, hungry. People who had laughed a minute ago suddenly studied their napkins, their phones, the ceiling, anything but Laura's face. A donor couple at the front turned their chairs slightly, as if shame could spread by proximity. Madison's lips parted, still painted and perfect, but her eyes darted toward exits like a cornered animal. Derek stood stiff under the stage lights, his bare ring finger exposed, his jaw working as if he could chew the truth into something smaller. When Charles Whitman said "terminated," the word didn't echo. It landed hard. And still Laura felt the sting of what came before. She heard it in the room's awkward silence, the way some people looked at her like she'd ruined their evening, not like she'd survived an attack. A few coworkers avoided her completely, afraid Derek's downfall might splash onto anyone who admitted they'd ever benefited from him. One woman Laura had covered shifts for stared at the floor like Laura didn't exist. At a table near the dance floor, Derek's sister, who'd once brought Laura soup when Noah had the flu, pulled her husband closer and shook her head as if the scandal was Laura's fault for letting it happen. A man from accounting muttered, "Boss, this is why you don't mix personal stuff with work." And Laura wanted to scream that she hadn't mixed anything. Derek had poured it into her life and sealed the lid. Charles's voice stayed level while HR gathered papers and the hotel security manager stepped behind Derek. Cameras everywhere kept recording, tiny red lights blinking as if the building itself would testify. Laura's hands were cold. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stand straight. No crying. Not here. Not for them. Then she reached for her tote strap, and her stomach dropped. The bag was lighter. She dug inside, fingers frantic, and found the envelope. But not her wallet. Not her only bank card. Not the small key ring with her car key and the spare key to her mother's apartment. Laura realized her keys and wallet were still in the security office with Derek. Laura slipped out through the side corridor the moment the crowd started moving again, like shame had its own tide. She didn't run. Running would make her look guilty. She walked fast, chin up, until the ballroom music faded and the hotel's back-of-house hum replaced it. Ice machine grinding, a distant elevator bell, someone calling for more coffee. In the empty ladies' room near the conference wing, she locked herself into the last stall and finally let her hands shake. Her tote sat on the floor, open, accusing. She dug again. Wallet, keys, card, nothing. Just the envelope, Noah's photo still inside her phone case, and a lipstick she never wore. For a second, she couldn't breathe. Not from heartbreak, from math. No keys meant no car. No wallet meant no gas, no cab, no pharmacy pickup for her mom's refill tomorrow morning. Derek had always made sure that when she fell where he could decide whether to lift her. Laura pressed her forehead against the stall door and bit down on a sob to keep it quiet. She could still hear Madison's microphone voice in her head, and worse, Derek's calm tone ordering the clip to be cut. He'd planned it like a budget meeting, like she was a line item. She stared at her wedding ring. The pale groove under it looked raw. Her fingers worked at the band, and for a moment it wouldn't move, as if even the metal resisted admitting the truth. When it finally slid off, she held it in her palm and felt something inside her harden. "I'm done begging." The words weren't dramatic. They were practical, like deciding to pay the electric bill before anything else. She wiped her face with a paper towel, squared her shoulders, and stepped out of the stall. At the sink, the mirror showed mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes and a woman trying not to disappear. Laura ran cold water, pressed it to her cheeks, and forced herself to think in steps. Get her keys. Get her wallet. Get proof of what Derek tried to do. Then protect Noah and her mother before Derek could retaliate. She reached for her phone to call the front desk for an escort to the security office. Then the screen lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. The voicemail preview popped up first. "Laura, this is Daniel from Hotel Security. I saved what your husband begged me to delete." Laura called the unknown number back with shaking fingers. "This is Laura," she whispered. "I need my wallet and keys. He took them." "This is Daniel," the man said, low and steady. "Hotel Security. I can't hand anything over without a supervisor present, but I can meet you by the security desk. Do not go alone." Laura hung up and walked fast through the conference wing, past stacked banquet chairs and a cart of half-eaten desserts. Her heels clicked like a countdown. When she reached the security desk window, her stomach dropped. Derek wasn't there anymore. The desk attendant avoided her eyes. "They already cleared the office," the attendant said. Mr. Bennett requested his personal items." "My items," Laura corrected, but her voice came out thin. She pushed outside to the valet lane, hoping her car key had been left at the desk. The winter air hit her lungs like a slap. Her phone buzzed with an email from HR. "Termination. Effective immediately. Conduct violation." Beneath it, a benefits notice. "Coverage ending today at 11:59 p.m. Laura opened her banking app. The joint account balance was near zero. A transfer line flashed. "Outgoing, D. Bennett, emergency relocation." Her card, the only one he let her carry, was now frozen. She tried to call her mother's rehab center to warn them, but the nurse answered first with a tight voice. "Ms. Bennett, your insurance authorization was revoked," the nurse said. "If we don't get payment by morning, we have to discharge your mother." Laura's knees weakened. She leaned against the stone wall outside the hotel, watching donors step into warm cars, laughing like nothing had happened. She thought of her mother's walker, of Noah's homework spread across the kitchen table, of the rent due Friday. She had no car key, no money, no job, and no proof in her hands. Only a ring in her pocket, and shame still clinging to her skin. She started walking toward the bus stop because walking was all she could afford. Halfway there, her phone rang again. "Laura," Daniel said, more urgent now, "I saw everything, and I saved the clip with his voice, plus the export logs with his name. If you want your mother safe and your life back, meet me in the lobby in 5 minutes. I'm not letting him erase you." Laura hurried back into the hotel lobby, clutching her phone like it was the only thing she still owned. The chandeliers out here felt harsher than the ballroom lights, exposing every smear of mascara, every tremor in her hands. Guests floated past in tuxes and gowns, laughing over valet tickets, while Laura stood near a marble column with no keys, no wallet, and a mother who could be discharged by morning. Daniel found her first. He was mid-40s, plain uniform. Calm eyes that didn't look away. "You're Laura," he said, not asking. "Stay where the cameras can see you." He nodded toward a nearby dome camera, then toward the front desk, where 2 clerks were watching like they'd been warned. "I need my wallet," Laura said. Her voice cracked. "He took everything." "I know," Daniel said. "He tried to walk out with it. I stopped him long enough to document the items, but he shoved them into his coat and ran when the CEO started moving." Daniel held up a small evidence bag with a printed property tag. Inside were Laura's keys and her worn wallet, scuffed at the corners like it had lived in her hand for years. Laura's knees nearly gave out. She took the bag with both hands, like a fragile thing. Before she could speak, Charles Whitman approached with the HR director and the IT specialist. Up close, the CEO didn't look angry. He looked resolved, like a judge who'd already seen the records. "Ms. Bennett," he said gently, "I'm sorry you were cornered tonight." Laura swallowed. "My mom's rehab. He revoked my insurance," she blurted. "I got an email." Charles nodded once, already ahead of her fear. "HR is reversing the termination notice. Your benefits will remain active while we investigate, and our counsel is contacting the facility tonight. You will not lose your mother's care because a manager abused his access." Laura's chest tightened, but this time with relief sharp enough to hurt. Daniel stepped slightly aside, letting the camera catch all of them together, witnesses in one frame. The HR director opened her clipboard. "I'm documenting everything you experienced," she said, "and I need you at headquarters first thing tomorrow. We have paperwork, logs, and a full security export." Charles held out a slim folder, heavier than it looked. "This is the start," he said. "You won't be alone in the next part." He pressed the folder into Laura's hands and said, "Be in my office at 8 a.m. and bring every bill Derek used to trap you." At 7:58 a.m., Laura Bennett walked into Whitman Industries with a paper cup of burned lobby coffee and a folder of medical bills under her arm. Her wedding ring sat in her coat pocket, heavy as a stone. Charles Whitman met her at the elevator with HR Director Renee Collins and the IT specialist Javier Santos. Daniel, the hotel guard, waited beside them, still in uniform. The company's counsel, Ellen Price, followed with a legal pad and a look that said she'd already read the worst. In the CEO's conference room, Javier mirrored his laptop to the screen. "Here's the export alert," he said, clicking. Derek Bennett's username appeared beside a timestamp, 8:47 p.m., and the words, "Video export requested." Another click opened the access log. Derek had entered the security portal, selected Lobby Cam 9:12 p.m., and marked Trim Audio. The system auto-emailed the alert to the CEO's office, then auto-archived the unedited file the moment someone tried to alter it. Renee placed a sealed envelope on the table. Inside was the resignation form Derek had shoved at Laura, plus the termination email that had gone out minutes later. "He used our HR template," Renee said, jaw tight. "But the approval code traces back to his manager token." She flipped to another report. "And this benefits cancellation request?" "Same token. He sent at 11:41 p.m., right after the Gala clip was cued." Daniel slid forward a thumb drive and a signed statement. "This is the full clip," he said. "His voice is clear. He orders the cut." Ellen pressed play with the sound low. Derek's voice filled the room anyway, confident, rehearsed, cruel. Laura opened her own folder, pharmacy receipts, rehab invoices, a notice of benefits cancellation, and a bank screenshot showing the joint account drained overnight. Charles didn't flinch. He pointed to one line on the hotel receipt Daniel had saved, "Transfer service, paid by D. Bennett, company card." Javier pulled up Derek's expense portal and highlighted the match. "Submitted under Community Media Services, approved by Derek himself." "You're not powerless," Charles said, looking straight at Laura. "He used company systems. That makes this a corporate matter, and a legal one." Javier scrolled again, then stopped. "One more thing," he said quietly. The transfer request lists a secondary recipient email. A name appeared on the screen. Madison Hale. Renee exhaled and said, "Now we subpoena the vendor invoice, and we take this to the board today." Ellen Price didn't wait for a subpoena. She called the transfer service number on the receipt while Javier pulled the company card statement. On speaker, a nervous vendor manager confirmed the charge. Rush same-night export and edit package, paid by Whitman Industries, requested by Derek Bennett, delivered to Madison Hale's email. Renee slid a printed policy across the table. Security, data integrity. "Any attempt to alter footage for personal reasons is gross misconduct," she said. And paying a vendor to do it with a company card is theft." Charles nodded to Javier. "Show her," he said. Javier opened one more log. Direct deposit change request. Submitted at 12:06 a.m. Approved with Derek's manager token, routing Laura's next paycheck to a new account. A second screen showed the account owner name from payroll verification. Bennett Consulting, LLC. Javier zoomed in on the routing number and opened the bank verification. The account was opened 2 weeks ago, using Derek's office address and Madison's phone number as the contact. Renee's eyebrows lifted. "That's identity abuse," she said. "It also explains the card. He drained the joint account to cover it." Laura's stomach turned. "He was going to take my paycheck, too," she whispered. Ellen leaned in, voice steady. "And he can't deny it. The vendor confirms the delivery. IT confirms the export attempt. HR confirms the forced resignation. And payroll confirms the diversion. 4 independent records, all time-stamped, all tied to his credentials." Daniel cleared his throat. "I also have the lobby audio on a separate system," he added. "Even if he tries to claim deepfake, the hotel's archive matches your copy." Charles looked at Laura like he'd made a decision weeks ago. "You're not powerless," he said again, slower. "He built this trap using systems he thought no one checked. Those systems check him." Renee flipped her calendar. "The board meets at 3 p.m. Derek is scheduled to present his promotion plan and accept a leadership award." Laura's hands tightened around her mother's rehab invoice. Last night, she'd been the woman pushed toward the exit. Today, she had documents, witnesses, and a CEO willing to say the truth out loud. Ellen tapped the folder. "We'll walk in together," she said. "We present the logs in order, we demand immediate restitution, and we refer the fraud to law enforcement." At 2:55 p.m., Laura's badge was reactivated, and the boardroom doors were about to open with Derek inside. Laura didn't go home to collapse. She went home to prepare. She checked on her mother first, calling the rehab nurse until someone confirmed the authorization was being reinstated. Then she drove straight to Noah's school, signed him out early, and sat with him in the parking lot long enough to look him in the eye. "If anyone asks about last night," she said, steady, "you tell them the truth. Your mom was attacked, and we have proof." Noah swallowed hard. He then nodded like he was trying to be brave for her. Back at her apartment, Laura opened every drawer Derek had treated like his property. She gathered bills, bank notices, pharmacy receipts, and the rehab invoices he used like chains. She photographed the joint account transfers and printed the screenshots at the corner store because paper couldn't be erased with a password. Then she took off her wedding ring and set it beside the family photo on the shelf, not as a memorial, but as evidence of what she survived. Her glow-up wasn't glamorous. It was strategic. A clean gray suit borrowed from a neighbor. Flat shoes she could walk in without shaking. Hair pulled back tight so no one could call her messy. Lip balm instead of lipstick. She practiced breathing until her voice stopped wobbling. At 2:40 p.m., Ellen Price called. "Well, when we enter," she said, "you don't argue with him. You state facts, dates, times, documents. Let the records do the shouting." Renee texted Laura a single line. "Badge active. Security instructed. You are protected." Laura sat at her kitchen table and wrote one sentence on an index card. "I am not resigning. I am reporting." She repeated it until it felt like a boundary instead of a wish. At 2:55 she walked into headquarters with Charles Whitman beside her. The lobby smelled like polished stone and expensive confidence, the same kind Derek wore. As they approached the boardroom corridor, Laura saw Derek through the glass wall smiling, handing out folders, already performing innocence. He looked up. His smile tightened, then returned, sharper. Derek lifted his voice to the board and said, "Before we begin, I need to warn you, my wife is unstable and may try to disrupt this meeting." Charles Whitman didn't let Derek control the opening. He tapped the table once, and the room obeyed. "Before we begin," Charles said, "there is a compliance matter involving Mr. Bennett." Derek laughed softly. "Sir, this is exactly what I meant. My wife is emotional." Laura stepped forward, card in hand. "I'm not emotional. I'm reporting fraud." Renee Collins stood beside her. "Board members, I am HR Director Renee Collins. At 11:41 p.m. last night, Mr. Bennett used a manager token to issue an unauthorized termination notice and cancel Miss Bennett's benefits." Javier clicked the projector. A log appeared. "Video export requested. D. Bennett, 8:47 p.m. Another line. Trim audio. Attempted. Then payroll, direct deposit change. 12:06 a.m. Bennett Consulting, LLC. Derek's face tightened. "Those logs can be manipulated." "Not by her," Charles said. "They're system-generated and mirrored." Laura opened her folder and slid out the rehab invoices and the bank screenshots. "He controlled every account," she said. "When I wouldn't sign a resignation, he drained our joint balance and tried to divert my paycheck." Ellen Price, company counsel, placed the vendor receipt on the table. "Rush export and edit package, paid on a company card, delivered to Madison Hale's email," she said. "The vendor confirmed on a recorded call." A speakerphone beeped. Daniel's voice came through. "This is Daniel Cruz, Hotel Security. I retained the original footage in our archive. The audio includes Mr. Bennett ordering the cut. Play the part where she grabs me, then cut before my voice." Silence. One board member removed his glasses. Another stared at Derek's hands, bare of a ring. Madison's name on the screen made directors exchange looks. An older woman whispered, "So the gala was staged." Charles nodded toward the glass wall where two corporate security officers waited. The boardroom camera blinked for the minutes. Laura's pulse hammered, but her voice stayed even. "I want my paycheck back, and I want him stopped." The chair cleared his throat. "Mr. Bennett, you are suspended pending investigation." "Terminated," Charles corrected, sliding a prepared letter forward. "For cause. Security will escort you out. The company will refer the fraud to law enforcement and seek restitution." Derek pushed back his chair so hard it scraped. He leaned toward Laura, smiling with his teeth. If you take this outside, your mother won't last a week without me." Derek lunged for Javier's laptop, fingers reaching for the delete key. Derek's hand shot toward Javier's laptop, but he didn't reach the keyboard. 2 corporate security officers were already inside the room. One caught Derek's wrist. The other pulled the laptop back. The board chair stood, voice sharp. "Enough. Sit down." Derek twisted, trying to look offended instead of desperate. "You're letting her destroy me with a doctored video," he snapped. "She's been unstable for months." Charles Whitman didn't argue. He nodded to Javier. Javier clicked once, and a new screen appeared. Archive copy, read only, auto-synced. "Even if he smashed this laptop," Javier said, "the originals are stored off-site and time-locked. They cannot be edited without leaving a trail." Ellen Price slid a second document forward. "Vendor invoice," she said. "Signed delivery to Madison Hale, plus the recorded confirmation call." Renee added the HR audit sheet. "And here is the token map showing his credentials used to cancel benefits and send a fake termination." The room's sympathy shifted, like a curtain falling. A director who had praised Derek minutes earlier pushed his folder away, disgusted. Another looked straight at Laura. "Miss Bennett," he said, "you should never have been cornered like that." Derek's face went red. "Laura, tell them you're fine," he hissed, voice low, the old threat returning. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding, or your mother pays for your pride." Daniel's voice came again from the speakerphone, steady. "Sir, I personally preserved the hotel's master copy. I will testify." Charles stood. "Security, escort Mr. Bennett out. Renee, restore Miss Bennett's employment status and lock her benefits. Ellen, call the police and file the referral." Laura didn't flinch. "Not anymore," she said. Renee's hands were already moving, sending emails in real time. A benefits reinstatement confirmation pinged Laura's phone, followed by a payroll reversal notice. Outside the glass wall, 2 uniformed officers arrived, one carrying a printed incident report with Daniel's statement attached. In the hallway, Madison's red dress flashed past the doorway, then stopped cold when she saw the badges. When the officers guided Derek to the door, he lunged backward toward Laura, but the grip tightened. "You think this makes you safe?" he barked. "I know every weakness you have." As Derek was hauled into the corridor, his phone kept vibrating. Charles picked it up with a pen, not touching the screen, and glanced at the preview. Emergency petition filed. Guardianship hearing set. Renee read the alert aloud. "He just filed for control of your mother today." By sunset, Derek's emergency guardianship petition was already collapsing. Ellen Price filed an objection within the hour, attaching the board's termination letter, the payroll diversion logs, and Daniel Cruz's sworn statement. The judge granted a temporary freeze on Derek's access to Laura's mother's medical decisions and set a hearing for the next morning, then ordered Derek to appear with counsel. He didn't. Police met him at his apartment instead, serving a warrant tied to the company card fraud and identity abuse. The officer who read his rights didn't raise his voice. He just asked for the phone Derek had used to route Laura's paycheck. Derek's neighbor watched from the hallway, arms folded, as the man who loved public stages was walked out quietly. Whitman Industries sent the rehab center a guarantee of payment and a written correction. Laura Bennett remained employed. Benefits active, termination void. Renee Collins personally called the facility director so Laura's mother wouldn't be discharged, then sent Laura a new payroll deposit confirmation to an account only Laura controlled. At the hearing, the judge reviewed the timestamps and called Derek's filing retaliatory. Guardianship was denied, and Derek was warned that any further interference would mean contempt. The company filed a civil claim, and the bank reversed the diverted payroll funds within days. Madison resigned before investigators interviewed her, but her donor family publicly withdrew support, and the hotel issued a no trespass notice. 2 weeks later, Laura sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand through physical therapy, while Noah did homework at the small table by the window. The ring Derek had weaponized sat in a drawer, not on her finger. Laura had opened her own checking account, met with Ellen to file for divorce, and secured a protective order that kept Derek away from the rehab center and their apartment. At work, Charles offered Laura a role in compliance because she had learned the hard way where systems could be abused. She didn't feel lucky anymore. She felt steady, supported by witnesses, records, and people who chose truth over comfort. On the day the board issued Derek's final separation notice, Laura spoke once to the staff. "If someone controls your money, your phone, and your voice, that isn't love. Document everything. Tell one credible person, then tell another." That night, Laura drove home with Noah, the radio low, her mother safe again, her future finally hers.